and Christina then is going to look at the final one today. So just to begin, in the Pebble Pad materials, and it doesn't matter if you haven't looked at them already, but I'm just kind of referring to a talk that was done in, there's a video clip that you're invited to have a look at. And in that, the speaker, I think it's Alison Peacock, she talks about Susan Hart's work, this idea of learning without limits. Now, Susan Hart is a really important academic and theorist in the area of inclusive education. She wrote a book, well, over 2 decades ago now, called Thinking Through Teaching. It's still actually a really excellent read. It's not very long, but it's a really, really good book. She was based at Oxford. I think she's probably retired now. But in that, and in her kind of subsequent work, which has really influenced this field, she talks about the conditions that are important for inclusive education. And she says it's really important for teachers to think about learners in particular ways. So it's really important for teachers to think about learners as capable of learning, that even a learner who you may not understand how they learn, that still you have a belief in them that they are able to learn, and that you work with kind of outcomes that are provisional. You might have some ideas about what a learner can achieve. You might have some ideas about what they are kind of like, what they might struggle with or what they're going to get to. But those really, as a teacher, you know that they're only provisional outcomes because learners often surprise us. Often when you start working with a learner and you think that they're going to do such and such, they actually do something maybe that's a bit different or maybe actually more than you expected, given the right conditions. And what Susan Hart also said is that actually relationships are at the heart of teaching, and they're also at the heart of teaching for learners who might require some extra support. And positive relationships where the teacher takes an interest in the learner, where they show an appreciation of the learner and that they like the learner and are interested in them and curious about them as a person. Those kinds of relationships can support the learner to achieve much more. As human beings, we internalize how others see us, and learners are no different in that respect. So that kind of powerful relationship that takes place between teachers and pupils is just as important for pupils who need extra support as it is for any other pupil. Now, what also Susan Hart sort of drew attention to, which is really important, is that when we're thinking about learning, we're not just thinking about what the learner brings. Okay, so learning is not just about what's kind of going on inside the learner, what's going on inside their brain, or whether they're paying attention, or whether they're behaving or not behaving. Those issues are there and they may have some significance, but actually the environment of learning, so where the learning takes place, how it is instructed, what expectations operate, what kind of other external influences are operating, those are really, really key as well. And actually can determine whether or not somebody has kind of like good outcomes or not such good outcomes. And the research of Susan Hart and other people in this area have really kind of shown that as a kind of a powerful aspect of not just teaching, but teaching for inclusive education. And what she also said is that how teachers think about learners, so whether they think that somebody is born with low ability and will not be able to do something, you do see, I've just been analysing in focus group transcripts, and it is kind of quite amazing when you hear people talk about how they see somebody when they come into school at a very young age and they know what that person is going to achieve, because actually we don't know what somebody is going to achieve, but what we think about somebody can actually have an influence on what they will achieve, because as I say, as human beings, learners internalize the opinions and thoughts of other people. And finally, what Susan Hart also talks about very powerfully is that children who have special needs or additional learning needs or disability, or whatever label you want to use, actually they are particularly vulnerable to these kind of deterministic ideas about ability, because they have, often a diagnosis of something. So they are kind of constructed in a very core way as somebody who's kind of not able to do something. Disability in itself as a term is something that is it's not contested, but it's seen as a problematic possibly problematic term. So Susan Hart's work is really, really powerful, and I certainly would urge you to look at the um, learning materials on her work, because it's really, really interesting. And this is a quote from her and Mary Drummond, where they said, "We need to see learning capacity as a product of the interplay of external and internal factors and states of mind. It resides in the collective as well as the individual." And that sense of community, that actually inclusive education is not about doing something to an individual and about individual deficit. It's about a community of practice, and it's about people together thinking and working together and relating to each other. And those kind of external influences, the actual classroom, how noisy it is, how it's organized, relationships, expectations, resource, the general culture of a school. Actually, in these focus groups, people talking about can-do mindsets. And I think the can-do mindset was being used to describe both pupils, learners having a can-do mindset, but also staff and practitioners having a can-do mindset as well. And also sort of collaboration amongst staff and between parents. So what we're going to start off with in terms of activity this afternoon is we're going to think about this really important issue of labeling, okay? And the reason that it's a very important issue is that as work within critical theory kind of tells us very powerfully, is that what you call somebody or what you call something actually constructs it to a certain extent. So naming something, by virtue of naming something, you actually kind of bring it into being. And the different labels that we use construct kind of different perspectives and ways of thinking about something. And that is clearly an issue for this area of inclusive education and additional learning needs. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, I've got to set up a Padlet. I hope it's working. It wasn't working earlier this week when Di tried it, but I've put the URL up there as well. And so hopefully people will be able to access that Padlet. But what I wanted you to do, we're going to put you into breakout rooms, but then to switch your camera on and then have a little chat about what labels or terms you use in your setting to describe children and young people. That's CYP, children and young people. So kind of what labels you use to describe learners, what labels you use to describe learners who need extra support, etc., etc. Now, of course, excuse me, in the Welsh context at the moment, the issue of terminology is a really important one, isn't it? Because what's happened since the ALN code has been introduced is that we actually have got groups and practices now that really have no label. So I'd be interested to see what people kind of post as far as that's concerned. So have a little bit of a brainstorm in your breakout rooms. And then if you could add to the Padlet in your groups, just kind of put all the different labels that you've kind of discussed and brought up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do that. So that's up until 10 to 2. And then we'll just have a little look at the Padlet. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to ask somebody, do I need to put people into breakout rooms or Christina? Okay. Thanks, Christina.